The Siege Collective had never known failure. In 400 star systems across the galaxy, their name carried a weight that made entire civilizations surrender before the first shot was fired. They were the world breakers, the fortress crushers, the unstoppable force that had reduced countless species to rubble and memory. When a planet needed to be conquered and its defenders eliminated, the Galactic Coalition called upon them. They always delivered. Siegemaster L stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Inevitable End, and studied the blue and green world spinning slowly beneath him. Earth, the humans called it, a small planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy. The species that lived there had only achieved interstellar travel within the last century, a mere blink of an eye in galactic terms. They had established a few colonies on nearby worlds and made contact with the greater galactic community just 50 years ago. Now they had annoyed the wrong powers, and the coalition wanted them subdued. L considered the assignment beneath his talents. His second-in-command, a veteran named, shared his opinion. They had broken open the crystalline fortresses of the Melody worlds, structures that sang with energy shields and reformed themselves when damaged. They had conquered the machine cities of the Eternal Network, grinding through automated defenses that adapted to every attack. What challenge could a species barely past its technological infancy possibly offer? The orbital defenses fell in hours. The humans had built impressive stations around their planet, armed with nuclear weapons and kinetic accelerators, but they were no match for technology. The Inevitable End swatted them aside like insects. The human fleet, such as it was, attempted a brave counterattack and was reduced to scattered debris within a day. L watched the last human warship break apart and felt nothing but impatience. He wanted this mission completed so he could return to worthier conquests. "Begin ground invasion," he commanded. "Standard pacification protocols." His tactical officers compiled the data on human population centers. The major cities would fall quickly under orbital bombardment, but the humans had anticipated this. Much of their population had evacuated to hardened positions across their continents. Underground bunkers, mountain facilities, fortified installations. This was expected. Every species tried to hide when they came. What was not expected was what the scans revealed about many of these defensive positions. Approached the command throne with a confused expression on his scaled face. "Siege Master, there is something strange about the human fortifications." "Explain." "Many of them are not military bunkers. They appear to be ancient structures, built of stone and primitive mortar. The humans call them castles." L demanded to see the data. His officers brought up images of the human defensive positions, and he found himself staring at structures that seemed impossibly old. Massive walls of cut stone rising from hilltops, towers with narrow windows, ditches filled with water surrounding the outer perimeters. These were not the gleaming metal bunkers or energy-shielded fortresses that every other species constructed when facing invasion. These were relics from a primitive age. The tactical officers laughed among themselves. One of them calculated that some of these structures were over 1,000 years old, built long before humans had discovered electricity, let alone. They were museums, historical monuments that the humans had apparently decided to hide inside during their final hours. L did not laugh, but he also did not worry. Stone walls could not stand against plasma cutters and graviton rams. Whatever sentimental attachment the humans had to these ancient buildings, they would learn soon enough that sentiment could not stop the. He selected the first target, a fortress called in a region the humans named France. It sat on a hill overlooking a river, its double walls forming concentric rings of defense. Thermal imaging showed thousands of humans sheltering inside, along with weapon signatures that indicated they had armed themselves with projectile weapons and explosives. Primitive by galactic standards, but still capable of harming soldiers if they were not careful. Orbital bombardment came first. The inevitable end's weapons batteries rained fire down upon the ancient fortress, turning the sky above it into a sheet of flame. When the bombardment ended, El expected to see nothing but a smoking crater. Instead, the walls still stood. The stone was scorched and blackened in places. Some of the outer towers had collapsed, but the main structure remained intact, its thick walls having absorbed the energy in ways the tactical officers could not immediately explain. And beneath that stone, in cellars and passages that had been dug deep into the earth, the humans had survived. El felt the first stirring of annoyance. He ordered ground forces to move in. The first wave consisted of shock troops, veterans of 100 planetary conquests. They advanced on the fortress in armored vehicles, plasma cutters ready to slice through the stone walls. The outer defenses fell quickly. The first ring of walls was breached within minutes, the ancient stones no match for weapons that could cut through starship hulls. The shock troops reported success. They were moving through the breach into the fortress interior. Then the reports stopped coming. El demanded updates. Static filled the communication channels. He ordered reconnaissance drones to investigate, and what they revealed made him lean forward in his command throne with an expression that had never seen on his face before. The shock troops had pushed through the outer wall as expected, but instead of emerging into the fortress proper, they had found themselves in a narrow corridor between two more walls. The humans called this design a barbican, though El did not learn that term until later. Above this corridor, set into the stone ceiling, were holes through which the human defenders poured fire. Not energy weapons, but simple projectiles and burning chemicals that filled the narrow space with death. The soldiers could not advance quickly through the confined corridor. They could not retreat quickly either. They could not spread out or take cover. They had been channeled into a killing ground where their superior technology meant nothing. The second wave fared no better. They pushed through the barbican, stepping over the bodies of their comrades, and breached the inner wall with graviton rams that reduced the ancient stones to gravel. Now they would have room to maneuver, room to bring their superior firepower to bear. They emerged into another killing ground. The space beyond the inner wall was open, what the humans called a bailey. It should have offered the forces room to deploy properly. Instead, it offered the human defenders clear lines of fire from every direction. Towers rose at each corner, and from narrow slits in those towers, human snipers began their work. The slits were barely wide enough to fit a rifle barrel, impossible targets for return fire. The soldiers in the bailey had no cover at all. Thermal imaging should have revealed the defenders, but the thick stone walls absorbed and scattered heat signatures. They could not tell where the shots were coming from until another soldier fell. El watched the casualty report scroll across his display and felt something he had not experienced in centuries of conquest. He felt uncertainty. He ordered heavier units deployed, armored vehicles with energy shields, combat drones with automatic targeting. Surely overwhelming force would carry the day, as it always had. The armored vehicles down in the ditch surrounding the fortress, the water deeper than expected, the mud beneath treacherous. The combat drones flew over the walls and into the interior, only to be caught in nets strung between the towers, dragged down by weighted ropes, and destroyed by humans who had prepared for exactly this kind of attack. By the end of the first day, El had lost 300 soldiers in the assault on a single fortress. The humans still held. Approached the command throne again, and this time his expression was not confused but troubled. Siege Master, I do not understand. How is this possible? They have no energy shields, no automated defense grid. They have stone walls and projectile weapons. How are they holding against us? El stared at the images of the fortress on his display. He looked at the thick walls, the narrow windows, the towers positioned to cover every approach. He looked at the bodies of his soldiers lying in the corridors and courtyards where they had fallen. I do not know, he admitted, but we will learn. He did not yet realize how much the learning would cost him. The siege stretched into its second week, and Siege Master L found himself doing something he had never done before. He was studying his enemy's fortifications as if they were something worthy of respect. His tactical officers had compiled detailed analyses of the castle's design, and what they found disturbed him more with each passing day. Every element of the structure served a purpose. Nothing was decorative or accidental. The humans who had built this place over 1,000 years ago had understood warfare in a way that L was only beginning to appreciate. The outer walls were not simply barriers. They were angled to deflect incoming projectiles and force attackers into predictable paths. The towers were rounded rather than square, which made them resistant to battering rams and eliminated the corners that climbers could exploit. The battlements at the top of the walls featured alternating raised and lowered sections that allowed defenders to fire while remaining protected. And there was something else, something his engineers had noticed about the narrow walkways where so many soldiers had died. The paths through the fortress twisted and turned in ways that seemed random, but were actually deliberate. A right-handed attacker advancing up the narrow spiral staircases inside the towers would find his weapon arm pressed against the central column, restricting his movement. A right-handed defender above him would have full range of motion. The humans had designed these stairs to give themselves every possible advantage. They had done this 1,000 years before. Shared his findings with barely concealed unease. Siege Master, the more we study these fortifications, the more we find. The overhanging platforms at the top of the walls have openings in the floor. The defenders use these to drop explosives directly onto anyone who reaches the base of the walls. They call these machicolations. L looked at the word as it appeared on his display, translated into the script. Such a simple idea, such a deadly one. "Continue the assault," he ordered. "We will adapt." But adapting proved difficult. Every tactic they employed, the humans seemed to have anticipated. When L ordered tunneling teams to dig beneath the walls and collapse them, the humans flooded the tunnels with water and smoke. When he ordered scaling teams to climb the walls with grappling equipment, the defenders poured burning oil down upon them from those overhanging platforms. When he ordered concentrated fire on single points of the wall, hopping to create breaches faster than the defenders could respond, the humans simply retreated to the inner fortifications and continued the fight from there. Had not one wall but two, one inside the other. The space between them was another killing ground. Even when they finally overwhelmed the outer defenses, they found themselves trapped in a narrow ring with walls on both sides and defenders above them once again. 2 weeks became a month. A month became 2 months. The casualty reports continued to climb, and L began receiving concerned messages from the Galactic Coalition asking about his progress. He responded with assurances that victory was near, but he knew they were hollow words. He ordered simultaneous assaults on other castles across the human territory, hopping to spread the defenders thin. What he discovered only deepened his unease. Every castle was different, and every castle was deadly. In a place called the Middle East, his forces attacked a fortress named Chevaliers. It sat on a mountain ridge, its walls following the natural contours of the rock in ways that made approach nearly impossible. Unlike with its 2 walls, this castle had 3 concentric rings of fortification. Each ring his forces penetrated revealed another beyond it, stronger than the last. In a land called Scotland, they besieged a castle named Edinburgh. It sat atop a massive volcanic rock, approachable only from a single direction. That single approach was heavily fortified, and the humans had positioned weapons to create overlapping fields of fire that shredded every assault wave. In a place called Japan, they found a castle named with a design unlike anything they had encountered. The paths leading to the main fortress twisted back upon themselves, creating a maze that confused and separated attacking forces. Defenders fired from hidden positions on multiple levels, and soldiers who advanced often found themselves going in circles, unable to find their way to the center. El called a council of his senior officers. He displayed images of all the castles they had encountered and asked the question that had been growing in his mind. How did a primitive species create such perfect defenses? One of his engineers, a scholar named who had studied fortifications across the galaxy, answered with a hesitation that suggested he could scarcely believe his own words. Siege Master, I have reviewed the historical records that the humans left accessible in their communication networks. These castles were not built by military engineers with advanced computers or modeling systems. They were built by trial and error over thousands of years. Each fortress represents lessons learned from the failures of previous fortresses. He pulled up records on his display, showing the progression of human castle design across centuries. Early structures were simple towers, easily conquered. Later structures added walls. Still later ones added multiple walls, towers, killing grounds, and all the other features that were now costing lives by the thousands. When one castle fell, the humans studied why it fell. They built the next castle to address that weakness. When siege weapons improved, castle designs improved to counter them. This process continued for over 500 years of constant warfare among their own kind. El absorbed this information in silence. They had conquered species with technology far beyond humanity. But those species had not spent fighting and killing each other in an endless cycle of siege and counter-siege. They had not written their lessons in blood across hundreds of generations. The humans had practiced war against themselves for so long that they had refined it into something the galaxy had never seen. They are not a young species, continued quietly. They are an ancient species that has only recently acquired. Everything else about them, especially their understanding of warfare, is very, very old. Spoke the thought that all of them were thinking. We are not fighting their technology, we are fighting their history. El made his decision. He would have to abandon standard tactics entirely. He would have to learn to think like the humans, to understand their castles not as primitive obstacles but as sophisticated killing machines. Only then could he hope to defeat them. He did not yet realize that even this would not be enough. The months of siege warfare had taught him something about human fortifications, but he had not yet learned the most important lesson of all. The castles were not just walls and towers. They were monuments to patience. The humans had built them to outlast their enemies, to endure while attackers broke themselves against the stone. And El was running out of soldiers to break. 9 months had passed since the siege collective descended upon Earth, and Siege Master El stood amid the ruins of his reputation. 60% of his ground forces were gone, not wounded, not retreated, gone. They lay in the ditches and courtyards and narrow corridors of 100 castles across the human world. His veterans who had conquered crystalline fortresses and machine cities had died in killing grounds designed 1,000 years before their species first touched the stars. The Galactic Coalition had stopped sending inquiries. They had started sending demands. Explain the delays. Explain the casualties. Explain how the greatest siege force in galactic history was being held at bay by stone walls and projectile weapons. El had no explanations that would satisfy them. He barely had explanations that satisfied himself. He stood on a hillside overlooking yet another castle, this one called, in a land the humans named Wales. Like all the others, it sat in a position that made assault nearly impossible. The walls followed the contours of a rocky ridge. Towers provided overlapping fields of fire. The main approach led through a series of gates and passages where every step would cost lives. He could take it. He knew that now, after 9 months of bloody education. He understood how the castles worked, how the defenses fit together, how the human minds had planned for every angle of attack. He could break if he committed enough soldiers, enough weapons, enough time. But he was beginning to wonder if breaking it was worth the price. A message came from the castle gates. The humans wanted to talk. Counseled against it. They will use the time to strengthen their defenses. This is a trick. Perhaps, El replied, but I find myself curious. I want to know what they have to say. He descended from the hillside under a flag of truce, a tradition the humans shared with many species across the galaxy. War had rules, even for the. Certain protocols were honored by all civilized beings. The human who met him outside the castle walls was a female of their species, dark-skinned and gray-haired, wearing a military uniform marked with symbols of rank. She introduced herself as General, commander of the European defense sector. El had killed many humans over the past 9 months, but he had never spoken with one. He found himself studying her with a strange respect. This small, soft creature had led the defense that had cost him so many soldiers. She showed no fear of him. "You requested this meeting," he said. "Speak." General looked up at him with steady eyes. She was less than half his height, her body fragile compared to physiology. Yet something in her bearing made him feel as if they were equals. "I wanted to offer you a way out," she said. El's first instinct was to laugh, to dismiss this as the desperation of a defeated enemy. But he had learned over the past 9 months that his instincts about humans were often wrong. "Explain." "You can leave. Take your remaining forces, return to your ships, and depart from our system. Tell the Galactic Coalition that Earth is not worth the cost of conquest. We will not pursue you. We will not seek revenge. We will simply let you go." "Why would we accept such terms? We have not been defeated." The general smiled, and it was not a smile of mockery. It was almost kind. "No, you have not been defeated. But you have not won either, have you? 9 months of siege, and you hold perhaps 20% of the castles you originally targeted. Your casualties mount every day. Your soldiers die in corridors designed to kill them, and you are no closer to victory than you were when you began." Al said nothing because she was speaking the truth. "Let me tell you something about these castles," General continued. She gestured at the walls of behind her, the ancient stones still standing after 700 years. "My ancestors did not build them to win wars. They built them to survive wars, to endure, to outlast." She began to walk slowly along the base of the wall, and El found himself walking beside her, listening. For centuries, armies came to break these walls. Some succeeded, most failed. But even when a castle fell, the lesson of its falling was learned by those who built the next castle. Every stone here represents something our ancestors learned about defense. Every tower, every gate, every murder hole is a solution to a problem that cost lives to discover. "You learned from your own wars," El said. "Your officer explained this to me." "Yes, we are not a peaceful species, Siege Master. We never have been. We fought each other for thousands of years before we ever reached the stars. And in all that fighting, we learned one thing above all others. The defender holds the advantage. Always. Given enough walls, enough patience, enough willingness to endure, the defender will win." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "You could break every castle on this planet if you committed enough resources. We both know this. But how many soldiers would it cost you? How many years? And while you spend those years grinding against our walls, what happens to your reputation? The siege collective that could not conquer a species armed with stone and gunpowder. What will your other clients think?" El felt the weight of her words. She was not threatening him. She was showing him a truth he had been avoiding. "Why offer mercy?" he asked. "We invaded your world, we killed your people. Why would you let us leave?" General looked back at the castle, at its ancient walls glowing gold in the afternoon sun. "Because we built these castles to outlast our enemies, not to destroy them. That is the human way. We endure, we survive, we wait. Eventually, the armies go home or they break themselves against our walls. Either way, we are still here." She met his eyes again. We could keep fighting you for another 9 months, another 9 years. The castles would still be standing when the last soldier fell. But what would be the point? You would be destroyed, and we would have gained nothing but more scars. Better for both of us if you simply leave. El considered her words. He thought of the reports he would have to file with the coalition. He thought of the soldiers he had already lost and the soldiers he would lose if the siege continued. He thought of his reputation, built over centuries of conquest, now tarnished by an enemy that refused to fight on his terms. And he thought of the castles, those ancient, patient monuments to human stubbornness. They had stood for hundreds of years before he arrived. They would stand for hundreds of years after he was gone. In the long view of history, his invasion was just another army that came and failed and left. If we depart, he said slowly, and I report to the coalition that Earth is not worth the cost of subjugation, there will be consequences for your species. You will be marked as difficult. Other powers may see you as a threat. Let them, General said. We have survived everything our own history threw at us. We will survive whatever the galaxy sends. And if anyone else wants to try their luck against our walls, they are welcome to learn the same lessons you learned. El was silent for a long moment. The wind blew across the hillside, carrying the smell of grass and stone and something else, something that might have been the weight of centuries. I will consider your offer, he said at last. He returned to his flagship and gathered his senior officers. He told them what the human general had said. He showed them the casualty projections for a continued siege, the years it would take to break every castle, the soldiers who would die in corridors and courtyards and killing grounds designed by minds that had been perfecting the art of defense since before the learn to walk upright. Protested, others joined him, they did not retreat, they did not accept terms from inferior species, the conquered. El listened to them all, and then he spoke. The humans are not an inferior species. They are an ancient species wearing the mask of a young one. Their technology is new, but their understanding of war is older than our empire. We have been fighting their history, and their history knows how to wait. He ordered the withdrawal. The inevitable end and its escort fleet broke orbit 3 days later, leaving Earth unconquered. El filed his report with the Galactic Coalition, and it spread through the communication networks like fire through dry grass. The Siege Collective had failed, not because they lacked strength, not because the humans had superior technology, but because the humans had built their defenses to outlast any attacker. They had turned patience into a weapon. They had made stone stronger than starship hulls. The coalition received the report with disbelief, then alarm, then a new and uncomfortable respect for the small blue world that had refused to fall. In the years that followed, other powers considered their options regarding Earth. Some thought about invasion, some thought about trade, some thought about alliance. But all of them remembered the warning that Siege Master El had included at the end of his report, the words that became famous across 100 star systems. Do not, under any circumstances, give the humans a reason to build new walls. And far below, on the surface of Earth, the castles stood in the morning light, patient and eternal, waiting for enemies that no longer came.